This presentation from Crafton Hills College is about how to write an abstract. An abstract is a summary. The challenge in writing an abstract is to accomplish two different goals that are sometimes at cross purposes. You have to be thorough, but you also have to be very brief. The purpose of an abstract is to inform the reader. The abstract is really written for the reader, and as your audience changes, so should you change the level, academically, at which the abstract is written, the tone of the abstract, and the emphasis. Now, by the emphasis, I mean the relative proportions of what part of the abstract receives how many words. The abstract is placed in front of the rest of a research article. It's one of the first things that the reader reads, but one of the last things that the writer writes. An abstract is generally not a proposal for future research, but abstracts of completed research often serve as proposals for conference presentations about the research. The abstract should be written after the research is completed, and preferably after the article itself has been written, at least a rough draft. The tone of the abstract is important. It should be very objective rather than evaluative. It certainly should not be self-congratulatory. The active voice is preferable to the passive. A formal approach is better than the first person, and precision is better than evocative language. In order to increase that precision, apostrophes and other punctuation marks must be used correctly. There should be noun and pronoun agreement. Remember, one person is not a they, a them, or a their. And there should be proper use of terminology that would serve as guidelines according to professional associations or a class that you happen to be in. The tense of the abstract should be the past. Remember, it should be written after the research has been completed. But when submitted as a proposal for a conference presentation, you can say that you are going to say something in the discussion section, but the other sections should represent what has already been done. So the bare minimum for an abstract is that the research should have already been designed, conducted, and statistically analyzed by the time the abstract is submitted. Regarding the content of the abstract, you have to answer these basic questions. Why did you do the study? How you did this study? What did you find out? And what does it mean? And where should we go from here? Let's look at each of these components or parts of the abstract. The first one, why you did the study, that should be fairly light. And in that, you're going to cover such things as the question, any hypotheses you might have had. You don't have to list them all. Maybe one major one. And a review of previous studies and theories. Now, if you're writing for a more general audience, you can spend a couple sentences or three on this. When writing for a more professional audience, this part can be either skipped or maybe just summarized in one sentence for the whole thing. Where you're going to have a very heavy content is how you did it, your methods, subjects, apparatus, and data analysis. Another heavy part, perhaps the heaviest, is going to be what you found out, your results, your findings, the hypotheses tested. Go ahead and include summaries of your descriptive and inferential statistics. The last part of what it means, you can go fairly light on for most audiences. Here you might have a sentence dealing with causal explanations or theoretical explanations, limitations or suggestions for future research. The format for an abstract is usually one paragraph with no indentation. But follow the specific guidelines for an abstract suggested by your professor if it's for a class, the conference organizers, or a journal editor if it's for publication or presentation. The way you make an abstract good and better is you write it, you get feedback, and you rewrite it. It is a cycle of writing and feedback and improvement. How long should abstracts be? Well, if you're writing one for one of my classes, keep it really short. 25 to 100 words should be adequate. If you're writing for journal articles, usually the editor wants it fairly short, 25 to 200 words. But if you're writing this as a proposal for a conference presentation, usually they want something more substantial. I've seen cases where they want up to 1,000 words, or they may have a short abstract required, 25 or 50 words, and then something longer of several hundred, up to 1,000 words. Regarding the proportion of those short abstracts, in other words, how many words or sentences are you going to use for each of the components, this is what I recommend for my classes. The first part, the why, handle it in one sentence, and you may formulate it as a question, as a hypothesis, or summary of previous literature. That was sufficient for me. The how, where you talk about the methods and design, that is going to be several sentences, perhaps one on how the data were gathered, one on sample characteristics. You definitely have to talk about which design you used and which statistical tests were used. The findings should include verbal explanations of the statistics used and the real descriptive findings. In other words, I want to see percents, means, medians, and correlations. And whenever you're talking about hypotheses, give me at least the p-value on that, or the Bayes factor. I think you should have maybe a sentence on the last part, the interpretation of results, maybe a sentence on limitations and future directions for research. Well, that's what I'm looking for in terms of writing your abstract.